A surprise drop in GDP. What does it mean for the economy? And will it force the Bank of England to think about an interest rate cut? Why it's not just inheritance tax that's causing the nation's producers of food to warn of Farmageddon. And cash in the community, the regrowth of high street banking. Very good afternoon on this Friday. It is Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Thanks for your company. The economy remained in reverse in October, and even though the latest GDP figures don't reflect the decisions made in the Halloween budget, they do show just how difficult businesses are finding the economic headwinds as we head into the new year. But let's look at the details. GDP fell by 0.1%, the same figure as it did in September. Manufacturing and construction sectors were particularly badly affected as the drop in the output defied market expectations. The economy has been bouncing close to the zero line for the last 12 months, once reaching 0.5%. But there's been no net growth, as you can see, since July's election. And last month, the main sectors of the economy, the service, industry, production and construction, all fell. So looking at the cumulative change in the level of output going back to the end of the pandemic back in 2021, services initially recovered well, but have been flatlining for the past 2 years. Manufacturing has never made up lost ground, but sectors like chemicals and mining have taken the biggest hits. The chemical industry is still 37% smaller in the last 3 years. It leaves the UK firmly in the middle of the growth forecast table, with Rachel Reeves saying she wants to lead it.
The numbers on GDP are disappointing, but it's not possible to turn around more than a decade of poor economic growth and stagnant living standards in just a few months. But you'll see from the plans we've been announcing, whether that is the energy reforms we've published today, the reforms to build 1.5 million homes that we published yesterday, the pensions reforms, the creation of a national wealth fund, this government are getting on with the job in improving economic growth and driving up living standards.
OK, let's get more on this and speak to the former member of the Bank of England's MPC committee from 2010 to 2016. That's Martin Wheal, who's also Professor of Economics at King's College London. Martin, very good afternoon to you. You know, these figures are frankly disappointing. There's no doubt about that. But we are relying on monthly figures, aren't we, rather than what we used to do is have a quarterly set of figures.
Well, we do get a quarterly figure, published, not surprisingly, once a quarter, and the monthly figures were introduced to give people a quicker sense of what was going on in the economy. I think they're useful as far as they go, but the important thing to remember is that they aren't as accurate as the quarterly figures. That said, I think if you look at the pattern over the last few months, there hasn't actually been very much economic growth. Whether in October the economy actually contracted or slightly or stagnated or grew slightly, I don't think we can tell from these numbers. But as I say, the overall picture, I think, is disappointing.
And what's behind it, Martin? What's your estimation about why we are seeing essentially stagnation, if you like?
Well, there are a number of reasons why that might be the case. One is that monetary policy, of course, was tightened quite a lot. That affects output with a lag. Normally, we expect to see the effect on output before the effect on inflation. I think economists will be studying the dynamics of what's happened to inflation over the last 3 years for quite a long time. But monetary policy is probably still restrictive, and restrictive means weak economic growth. You might say, is the Bank of England going to do something about that? Well, of course, they meet next week, but they also have to take in mind what's happening to inflation. And although headline inflation is in pretty good shape, there is underlying concern about measures of, if you like, underlying inflation.
Yeah, Martin, and we'll come on to talk about the Bank of England in a second. I just want to focus just on these October figures, because a lot of people have laid the blame at the budget. How much of a drag do you think the build-up to the budget was?
Well, the budget, first I should say, of course, the budget itself can't be to blame. That was right at the end of October. The build up to the budget, I think, was rather unfortunate. Many people will have got the impression that the Chancellor was looking for a tax that would bring money in without anyone actually paying it. And there was a sort of semi-public debate about what sort of shape an increase in taxation might take before the Chancellor settled on what I think was really the most practical alternative, raising a broad-based tax. So I think there was uncertainty ahead of the budget, but my guess would be that actually the tighter monetary policy was more important.
OK, and just let's return to, as promised, the Bank of England's. What are we thinking is going to happen with interest rates? You talked about the compromise there, the different factors that the MPC will have to take into consideration next week and in the months ahead. What's your sense of where we may well go?
Well, I expect interest rates probably will fall further, but I don't think the bank will be in a hurry to cut interest rates because, as I say, although indicators of underlying inflation have come down, they are still elevated. And of course, the last thing that the bank wants to see is stimulating the economy again and pushing inflation, and particularly underlying inflation, back up.
OK, Martin, really appreciate your time and your thoughts this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. That's Martin Wheel there from King's College London.
Thank you.
Now, farmers blocked roads around Westminster this week in protest about the government's plans to change inheritance tax rules. But that might not have been the only thing they were worried about. New trade deals are bringing more imported food, subsidy payments are changing, and productivity itself may be slowing. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been looking into the farming industry.
Probably seen farming is in the news at the moment. You might be fooled into thinking it's all about inheritance tax, but actually, talk to any farmers and there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of other pressures, to the extent that for some people it almost feels, you might say, like Farmageddon. Let's have a look at some of the data, though. And the big story here, or at least one of the big stories here, is the UK has left the EU. And that means a big change in the way that farmers are getting payments. For a long time, farmers have been, to some extent, reliant on basic payments, which have been part of the Common Agricultural Policy. But that's starting to change. This is showing you the DEFRA budget this last few years and the next few years. And what you'll probably notice, OK, so the black bits are showing you the basic farm payments, and you get those just depending on how much land you have. It used to be how much food you were producing, but now it's how much land you have. And the green bits are environmental schemes, so improving hedgerows, improving the quality of the soil and so on. And what you'll notice is, look, the old EU-style farm payments, the black bits, they're being phased out gradually over time, and it's the green bits, the environmental payments, that are growing, and by 2027, that's going to be 100%. And talk to farmers and they'll say, listen, the black bits are the bits that are really encouraging me to grow food. Talk to people in DEFRA and they say, no, listen, if you don't improve the environment, the quality of the soil, you're not going to have food security. On food security, though, it's actually worth looking back a little bit at the story here, the history of the UK and its food security. This line is showing you how much of our food we produce domestically. And back kind of before World War II, it was quite low, about 35%. Then you had all of these campaigns, digging for victory, encouraging farmers to grow more food post-1945, which, look, the line went up as a result of that, up from 35% or so to around 60%. Then we joined the EU, and look at that, again, went up to a post-war high. About 80% of our food was grown or reared in this country. But what's interesting is it's come down a bit, certainly, but it's been pretty steady over the last few decades. 62% in the last year, but around that 60% for a long period. And, compare the UK to other countries around the world, well, we're certainly not a winner on this. But actually, more of our food, this is the same thing, by the way, the higher the bars are, the more of your food you're producing domestically. Germany, Switzerland, they're more reliant on imports, mostly from around Europe. Japan, France, they produce more food domestically than the UK. And then look at Canada and Australia, actually producing so much food that they are net exporters there. We'll come back to that issue in a second. But a lot of people saying, listen, because of what's going on at the moment, there might be questions about food security. And it's not just changes in Brexit or post-Brexit payments from the government. It's also what's going on with, you might say, the climate, or indeed certainly the weather. This is showing you how much rain, basically, we have had in the last winter. the darker this is, darker blue the bits are here, the more rain versus the historical average. And it was a really, really wet period. And as a result of how wet it was really difficult to grow wheat in particular. And have a look at what happens to the amount of wheat that we've harvested in this country. That's the red bar there. And we're going back through harvests all the way back to the 1980s. This actually was the second lowest tonnage of wheat, so the second worst harvest, basically, for wheat since 1984. And that's only really because those records began in 1984, so second lowest that we've got on record. So that's not good. On top of that, so the pressures from the weather, pressures from changes post-Brexit, there's also this. Because we're outside the EU, we're now signing trade deals with other countries, and we've signed 2 deals with Australia and New Zealand, and one of the consequences of that is they can import more dairy and beef into the UK. So these lines are showing you imports of dairy and beef from Australia and New Zealand. That's when the trade deals came into force. Look at what happened next. Those lines shot up. So that's food coming into the UK from overseas. It's more competition for domestic farmers. So you can see, put it all together, it's getting tougher. And there's something else that's going on as well. This is kind of a longer-term issue. In fact, this is one of the longest-range charts I've ever produced for Sky, because it goes back to basically almost the Dark Ages here, certainly the medieval period. And this is showing you the amount of wheat that comes out of each hectare of land. So the higher this is, the more kind of productivity you have on each farm. And what you can probably notice is, for most of history, for century after century, it was really quite low. OK, and in the kind of Victorian period, it started to improve a bit. You had better steel, you had better ploughs, better machinery. But the real change came in the second half of the 20th century, basically. You had artificial fertiliser and lots of things pushing up this line, a massive, massive shift in agricultural productivity. And that basically is what a lot of people have lived through. That's, you know, relatively recent memory, is a massive shift in the amount of food you could get out of the land. And here's what's significant and interesting about this. Is there a shift now? And are we seeing that line, which rose so steeply for most of the 20th century, start to slow down? And farming productivity, if that goes lower, that makes it even more difficult for those who are farming the land to try and grow more stuff. So put it all together, all of that, and the Brexit changes and trade changes and what's going on with the weather, and perhaps it's no surprise that people are talking about Farmageddon.
There you go, Ed Conway with some great analysis there, and you can get more on that, indeed, on the Sky News website. Now, more than 7,000 cash machines in the UK have closed in the last 3 years, but figures show that 3.1 million people rely almost entirely on cash in this country as a form of payment. Bucking the trend of bank closures, though, Cash Access UK has opened its 100th banking hub in Lancashire today in a bid to protect people's access to actual physical hard cash. Well, earlier I spoke to Gareth Oakley, the Chief Executive of Cash Access UK, to hear more about him putting cash back into the heart of the community.
Access UK is an organisation which is owned by the 10 major high street banks. Our role is to put cash services into local communities, and typically we do that when the last bank in a town has closed. And that often means that we put banking hubs into towns, which are a bit like traditional bank branches, the difference being that all of the customers of those banks can use that branch.
And when you say all the customers can, this is about physically getting access to cash, isn't it?
Yes, cash and face-to-face services. So, as I said, it looks very traditional. There is a banking counter there where people can withdraw money, pay money in, but people also have access to their own banks. So on different days, different banks attend. And if you want advice from your bank, then you can go into a banking hub and get it.
And is this because people are just struggling to get access to traditional banks because they've disappeared from the high street?
Yes, obviously there have been a number of bank closures over the years. And for most people aren't using banks anymore. But there are some people in society where actually access to cash and access to face-to-face services is really important. And some of those people tend to be some of the most vulnerable in society. So it's really important that there is some provision made and that those people don't get left behind.
Yeah, isn't that the essence of all of this, in the sense that I think there are millions and millions of people who still essentially only use cash, and, you know, society's kind of drifted off in one direction and they've felt somewhat left behind?
Yeah, as I've said, those people quite often tend to be in vulnerable circumstances. So it may be that they are financially or digitally excluded. It may mean that they are elderly. It could be that there are some disabilities which prevent them from using other types of electronic payments. And more often than not, the ability to be able to deal with someone face to face is really, really important, as well as the ability to actually have physical cash.
And there are now, what, I think it's 126, is it? Deposit services, 176 banking hubs have been recommended. You know, these are now opening up and down the country.
That's right, 176 banking hubs have been recommended. We've reached an important milestone today because we've opened the 100th banking hub. We have already committed to rolling out 350 banking hubs over the next couple of years as well.
And this is not just good for people who need access to cash or to banking services, but it seems that it's good for the local economy where these hubs tend to be placed. I'm reading a stat saying that almost half of businesses in and around these hubs have seen an increase in their own business.
Yes, so we are seeing some level of sort of regeneration. So we have serviced some of communities where we've had some of our longest standing banking hubs, and businesses are telling us that actually they're seeing an increase in footfall since the banking hub was in the high street. And obviously that very much goes against the trend of decreasing footfall over the years. And customers and consumers are saying that actually they are coming into the high street more often. So there is certainly some evidence to say that a level of regeneration is occurring as a result of banking hubs.
And just very finally, Gareth, you know, I've certainly got used to tapping on my phone or my card, and you're right, I can't remember the last time I physically went into a bank. But is there an upside? And it's convenient, by the way, I'm not complaining about it, but is there an upside? You know, people talk about cash being king. Is kind of cash king? Is there an advantage still to using cash and having those face-to-face banking services?
Well, I think for a section of society, absolutely, I would say it's not just an advantage, it's essential. It may be because you need the physical cash to actually be able to budget. It may be because you're relying on someone else, such as a carer, to undertake your shopping and manage some of your finances in some way. So physical cash is still really, really important.
Gareth, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. There you go. You're watching Sky News and Business Live. We'll take a quick break. Up next, it is the markets this afternoon. The FTSE has finished down slightly on this Friday, the end of the working week. We'll have all the details after this quick break.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the net?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
The referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under.
Sky News, the full story first. that may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering designed to humour and to help us.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Dense heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. Let's have a look at the markets in a bit more detail now. Let's start in the US. Wall Street reclaiming some of the ground it's lost over the last week or so. That's interesting because actually when you look at Europe, it's been a bit more muted. Maybe following, maybe not surprised, given that ECB decision yesterday, which was within expectations, the cut to interest rates, but no large movements on any of the indices today. If we look at the FTSE, it is down also just a fraction, but it is down today, 0.14%. Let's have a look at the currencies. It does seem that those GDP figures have mainly hit sterling's comparison to the to the dollar and the euro there, down, particularly interestingly against the euro, given the fact that it had made quite a lot of ground. It was in an 8-year high, a post-Brexit high earlier on this week. And then finally, let's look at oil, and it is also up a little today at just over $74 a barrel. OK, let's bring all this together with Lucinda Guthrie, who joins me now. Very good afternoon to you, Lucinda. And as I was saying, the markets don't really have seemed to have moved today on the back of those GDP figures, but sterling has definitely taken a hit.
Yes, indeed. Sterling has taken a hit, and it is that digesting of the poorer than expected economic data. One of the things that we've really been observing is that boardrooms are really digesting the impact of Rachel Reeves's budget, and indeed that was already leaked before, so that's why we're seeing that in the October data already. And then the other thing that is on the radar is the impact of potential tariffs coming in next year. This is really impacting boards' decisions. I think from my perspective, looking at M&A, I believe that we will see more defensive M&A going into the next year. We'll also see a flight of more UK companies, or either choosing to go private or looking for scale, like we saw with Direct Line, Aviva this week, and earlier in the year, Virgin Money. And then I think we're going to see a huge volume of activity in the US. with the anticipation of, more of a pro-business environment and indeed easier routes to clearance for a number of sectors for Anto.
And Lucinda, in many ways, that's a reflection of where we've been this year, where, actually, if you look at the stock market of the US, it's performed really, really quite well again. And it does feel a bit lackluster here.
Yeah, well, that's it. This is one of the reasons why we've had more, let me be precise. We've had 29 large cap listed UK takeovers this year because UK listed companies are really struggling with that valuation comparison to their US peers. A number of companies like Ashtead this week, huge market cap, are saying, well, you know what? Actually, most of my business is in the US. I might as well move my listing over there and maybe over there I'll get a better valuation.
Okay, and just very briefly, in 10 seconds if you can, Lucinda, I mean, are you optimistic about next year? It looks like it's not looking great from where we're sitting right now.
I'm optimistic about the US. Absolutely. I feel there's going to be a lot of activity over there. For the UK, I think we've got some challenging times ahead, and I feel that it is going to be those defensive moves that we're going to see from a number of UK customers.
Lucinda, as always, thank you very much indeed. Lucinda Guthrie there. Thank you. OK, that's it from me on Business Live for today, and indeed this week. Back, of course, on Monday at 11:30. Do join me then. Up next, it's Jonathan Samuels with the News Hour. Have a nice weekend. Goodbye.